The nursery was painted. The name was chosen. The penthouse had every luxury $30 million could buy. And then, on a Tuesday morning, Sakura Harlow packed a small duffel bag, picked up her car keys, and vanished, slipping past the security team that watched the building around the clock without a single word to anyone. For 48 hours, Sebastian Harlow, one of the most powerful men in New York, didn't call the police, because he already knew why she left, and the woman sitting across from him at his private office desk knew it too. To anyone looking from the outside, Sebastian and Sakura Harlow were the kind of couple that made people believe in love again. Sebastian Harlow, 41 years old, was the founder and CEO of Harlow Capital Group, a private equity firm with holdings across real estate, technology, and luxury hospitality. Forbes had placed him on its cover twice. His name appeared on buildings in Manhattan, on hospital wings in Chicago, and on the lips of every financial analyst who tracked the S&P 500 with religious devotion. He was tall, dark-haired, and carried the specific kind of confidence that doesn't perform itself. It simply exists. Like gravity. Sakura Whitfield Harlow was 34. She had been a documentary filmmaker before she married Sebastian. Not a hobby filmmaker, not a weekend festival type. She had a Peabody Award nomination for a film she made about child labor in cobalt mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. She was brilliant, soft-spoken, and had the kind of beauty that didn't announce itself. She wore it the way some people wear old sweaters, comfortably, without thinking about it. They had met at a charity gala in 2018, one of those events hosted at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the flower arrangements cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sakura had been there documenting the event for a short film commission. Sebastian had stopped in front of her camera and said, completely unprompted, "You're going to cut me out in editing, aren't you?" She had laughed and said, "Depends on whether you say anything worth keeping." He had spent the rest of the evening making sure she kept every frame. They married in 2020, a small ceremony in Tuscany, just 40 guests overlooking the Val d'Orcia. Sakura's best friend and former college roommate, Diane Mercer, was her maid of honor. Sebastian's closest confidant and chief of staff, Patrick Drummond, was his best man. By 2023, they were living in a sprawling penthouse on the Upper West Side, and Sakura was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a girl they had already decided to name Audrey. The nursery was pale yellow. There was a mural of a sleeping fox on the wall that Sakura had commissioned from a Brooklyn artist named Tessa Rowe. The crib was white oak. A small bookshelf was already lined with picture books. Goodnight Moon, The Velveteen Rabbit, Where the Wild Things Are. From the outside, it was a life that looked finished, complete, like someone had decorated it and stepped back and said, "Yes, this is exactly right." But Sakura had stopped sleeping properly at around the 5-month mark of her pregnancy, and it wasn't the physical discomfort. She would lie awake beside Sebastian and stare at the ceiling and feel something she couldn't name, something that pressed against her chest from the inside, like a word she couldn't quite pronounce. She started noticing things, small things, the way Sebastian's phone went face down on the kitchen counter the moment he walked in from work, the way he showered immediately upon coming home, not unusual for a man who moved through packed Manhattan offices all day, but the timing had changed. Before, he used to sit with her first, for a glass of wine, ask about her day. Now he disappeared into the bathroom within minutes of arriving, as though washing something off before she could smell it. She noticed that he had started closing the door to his home office during calls, when before he had always left it open. She noticed that he mentioned a woman named Natalie Voss twice in 3 weeks, once as someone from the Meridian Deal team, and once as just a colleague who was at the dinner. Two separate mentions, two separate contexts, delivered with the studied casualness of someone who had rehearsed the casual. Sakura didn't say anything. She wasn't a confrontational person by nature. She was an observer. That was literally her profession. She watched, she waited, she looked for patterns, and the pattern she was finding was written itself in neon letters across every wall of her marriage. She called Diane one evening in late October, while Sebastian was at a working dinner. Diane Mercer was a family law attorney based in Boston, which was not a coincidence in terms of who Sakura chose to call. "Dee," she said, sitting on the floor of the nursery with her back against the crib, her hand resting on her stomach where Audrey was pressing a small foot against her ribs. "I think he's having an affair." There was a break on the other end. "Tell me everything," Diane said, and Sakura did. Natalie Voss was 30 years old, Harvard-educated, and the kind of woman who moved through rooms the way a spotlight does. People turned. She was a senior associate at Keller Bright Advisory, a boutique financial consulting firm that had recently been brought in to work on a major restructuring deal that Harlow Capital was spearheading. That was how she and Sebastian had met, professionally, legitimately, in a glass-walled conference room in Midtown, with 12 other people present. But somewhere between the conference room and the 4 months that followed, the relationship had become something else entirely. Natalie was not a naive woman. She knew Sebastian was married. She had seen the photographs. Everyone had. The Harlows were, in the way of very wealthy New Yorkers who tried not to appear in too many magazines, inescapably visible. There had been a profile in Town and Country in 2022 that featured a photograph of Sakura and Sebastian at their Connecticut weekend home. Sakura in a linen dress, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting in Sebastian's, completely unposed. It was the kind of photograph that made you feel like a voyeur for looking at it. Natalie had looked at it. She had also told herself, as people in her position always do, that what she was seeing from the outside was not the full picture, that marriages were complicated, that Sebastian had told her one evening at a bar in the West Village after the rest of the team had gone home that he and Sakura had grown apart, that they were more like co-parents at this point than anything else, that the pregnancy had been planned before things got complicated, and he didn't know what he was going to do. She had believed him, or she had chosen to believe him, which is a different thing entirely. What Natalie did not know, could not know, because Sebastian had never told her, was that Sakura was not a passive participant in her own marriage. Sakura was watching. Sakura was collecting information with the patience and precision of someone who had spent a decade making documentary films about complicated truths. By the time November arrived, Sakura had enough. She had hired a private investigator, a man named Glenn Tasker, who operated out of a nondescript office in the Flatiron district and came recommended by Diane, who had used him in 3 divorce cases. Glenn Tasker was thorough and discreet. Within 2 weeks, he had confirmed what Sakura already suspected, delivered in the form of a manila envelope that she opened sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon with a cup of chamomile tea and her hands perfectly steady. Photographs, timestamps, a receipt from the Lowell Hotel on East 63rd Street, dates that aligned with working dinners, late meetings, unexplained absences. Sakura sat with the envelope for a long time. Then she stood up, walked to the nursery, stood in the doorway for a while, looking at the sleeping fox on the wall, and made a decision. She called Diane. "I'm leaving," she said. But not the way he thinks. It was a Tuesday in the 2nd week of November. 6:47 in the morning. Sebastian had left for the office early. earlier than usual, which Sakura had noted without comment. She had been awake since 4, which was normal now. She had lain in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about the woman in the photographs from the Lowell Hotel, and felt something move through her that was not quite grievance and not quite rage, but some precise combination of the two that had no single word in English. After he left, she got up. She made herself breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, and she ate all of it slowly, looking out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, while the morning light came in pale and cold off the Hudson. Then she packed a bag. Not a suitcase. A duffel bag, medium-sized, dark green. She packed practically. Clothes for a week, her toiletries, her prenatal vitamins, her laptop, her external hard drive with her film archive, her passport, and the manila envelope from Glenn Tasker, which she tucked into the interior zip pocket. She called her OBGYN, Dr. Pamela Loft, and left a voicemail saying she needed to reschedule her Thursday appointment and would be in touch with new availability. She wrote a note. It was 4 sentences long. She left it on Sebastian's pillow. Then she walked out of the penthouse, took the elevator to the parking garage, got in her car, her own car, a dark blue Volvo she had owned since before the marriage, and drove away. She didn't tell Sebastian where she was going. She did not tell her mother, Margaret Harlow, who called her every Sunday and called her sweetheart. She did not tell Patrick Drummond, who had always been kind to her, or any of the household staff who adored her. She told one person. She told Diane. And Diane was already waiting for her. Sebastian came home at 7:30 that evening. He noticed the quiet first. The apartment had a particular quality of silence when Sakura wasn't in it, something he had experienced before during the rare occasions she traveled for work. But this was different. He couldn't explain how, exactly. The quiet felt intentional. He walked through the apartment calling her name. Kitchen, empty. Living room, empty. Her studio, a small room off the hallway where she kept her editing equipment, dark and unused. He went to the bedroom. He saw the note on his pillow and picked it up. It read, I know about Natalie. I know about the Lowell. I know everything. I am leaving to protect myself and our daughter from the humiliation of staying. Don't call me. Don't have your people look for me. I will be safe, and I will be in contact with my attorney. If you love Audrey at all, you will let me go quietly. Clear. Sebastian read it twice. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed. Slowly, the way people sat when their legs stopped working. And he held the note in both hands and did not move for a very long time. He didn't call the police, as the note had predicted he wouldn't, not because he was guilty, though he was, but because he was also terrified. Terrified of what calling the police would mean. Terrified of the story it would start, the story he would have to tell publicly, the version in which he was the villain. And he was rational enough to know that he was, in fact, the villain. He called Patrick Drummond instead. Patrick arrived within 20 minutes. He was 53, silver-haired, and had been with Sebastian since the beginning of Harlow Capital. He was the kind of man who solved problems before they became catastrophes, which was the primary reason Sebastian employed him. Patrick read the note, set it down on the nightstand with care, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, How long? Sebastian looked at the floor. 4 months. Does she have resources? Somewhere to go? She has Diane. She has her own accounts. I never consolidated our finances. She always had access to her own money. Then she's safe, Patrick said. She left her own choosing. She's safe, and she's angry, and she's protecting herself. She's 7 months pregnant, Patrick. I know. She's 7 months pregnant, and she's alone somewhere because I—" Sebastian stopped. Patrick waited. "Call Glenn Tusker," Sebastian said finally. Patrick looked at him. "She said not to have people look for her." "I'm not going to drag her back. I just need to know she's safe. I just need to know she's not alone. That she's somewhere with Diane. Somewhere warm. That she's—" His voice broke. It was a specific kind of breaking, the kind that happens when something that has been held very tightly for a very long time gives way all at once. Patrick had never seen Sebastian Harlow cry before. In 20 years. He picked up his phone and called Glenn Tusker. Natalie Voss found out about Sakura's disappearance through the New York Post. She was at her desk at Keller Bright on a Thursday morning, 2 days after Sakura had left, when a colleague named James Whitmore put his phone down in front of her coffee cup and said, "Isn't Sebastian Harlow your client?" The item was small. It wasn't front page. It was buried in the page 6 adjacent digital column that the Post ran online. Sources close to the Harlow family confirm that Sakura Whitfield Harlow, documentary filmmaker and wife of billionaire financier Sebastian Harlow, has not been seen at the couple's Upper West Side penthouse since Tuesday morning. A spokesperson for Harlow Capital declined to comment. The couple is expecting their first child. Natalie read it 3 times. She had seen Sebastian the previous Friday evening. They had met at a restaurant in the West Village, the same one where things had, months ago, shifted from professional to something else. He had been distracted, she remembered now, in a way she had attributed to work stress. He had checked his phone repeatedly. He hadn't stayed long. He had kissed her in the street outside and said he had an early morning, and she had watched him get into a waiting car and driven home herself. She had not known, sitting across from him over shared appetizers on that Friday, that his wife already had a manila envelope in the kitchen drawer. That Sakura had known for weeks, that the woman he had described as having grown apart from him was at that very moment painting the trim around a nursery mural and waiting, with extraordinary patience, for the right moment to walk out. Natalie called Sebastian's cell phone. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted, "I saw the Post item. Please tell me she's okay." He did not respond until that evening. One message. "She's safe. I can't talk right now." She stared at the message for a long time. She had understood, in an abstract way, that she was in a situation with consequences. But she had allowed the abstraction to keep the consequences at a comfortable distance. Now they were pressing in from all sides. Now there was a pregnant woman who had packed a bag and driven away somewhere, and a man who was not texting her back, and a photograph she had seen in town and country of a woman in a linen dress laughing in the sunshine. And Natalie found herself, unexpectedly and inconveniently, thinking about that photograph more than she could explain. She told herself it wasn't her fault. She told herself Sebastian had been the one who had pursued it, who had escalated it, who had constructed the narrative of a hollow marriage to make her feel less like a wrecker of things. She told herself all the things that people in her situation tell themselves. But she was smart enough to know that "it's not entirely my fault" is a very different sentence from "I didn't do anything wrong." She went home that evening and called her older sister, a woman named Brooke, who lived in Philadelphia with her husband and 3 children. Brooke was warm and practical and did not sugarcoat things. "Nat," Brooke said after listening to all of it, "you need to prepare yourself." "For what?" "For the possibility that whatever he told you about his marriage was what he needed to say to make this happen, not necessarily what was true." Natalie sat with that for a long time after they hung up. That night, she looked up everything she could find about Sakura Whitfield Harlow, the town and country piece, an interview Sakura had done with The Atlantic about her cobalt mine documentary, a short video clip from a film festival panel where Sakura sat on a stage and spoke quietly but precisely about truth-telling and the ethics of documentary filmmaking and what it means to show a viewer something they don't want to see. Natalie watched the clip twice. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the dark for a very long time. Sakura was in Vermont. Diane Mercer had a cabin outside of Woodstock, a proper cabin, not the performative rustic kind, but a real one with good insulation and a working fireplace and a porch that looked out over a frozen field where, on her first morning there, Sakura saw 3 deer moving silently through the white. She had driven straight through, nearly 5 hours, arriving at 2 in the afternoon, and Diane had been waiting on the porch with hot soup and a wool blanket and the specific grace of a person who understands that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is simply be present and not ask too many questions immediately. They sat by the fire that first night, and Sakura talked. She talked for 2 hours. Not about Sebastian's betrayal specifically, not yet, but about everything surrounding it. About how she had felt the marriage changing, and had told herself it was pregnancy hormones, stress, the weight of a new life approaching. About how she had refused for months to trust her own instincts, because trusting them meant confronting something she did not want to be true. About how the cruelest thing infidelity does is not the act itself, but the revision it forces. Looking back over everything you thought was solid and finding it riddled with hollow spaces. She talked about Audrey, how fiercely she already loved someone she hadn't met yet, how she pressed her palm against her stomach in the dark and felt Audrey move and thought, "You are the only person in this situation who has done absolutely nothing wrong, and I will burn down everything to protect that." Diane listened. She did not say, "You should have seen the signs," and she did not say, "He's probably sorry," and she did not say any of the useless things people say. She said, "What do you need?" And Sakura said, "Time, and then I need to know my options." Diane nodded. "You have both." On the second day, Sakura called Dr. Pamela Loft directly. Pamela was more than her obstetrician. She was the kind of doctor who had been recommended by 3 different friends and had turned out to be better than all 3 of them had described. She was calm, competent, and unsentimental in the way that the best medical professionals are. She cared deeply, but she did not fuss. "Sakura," she said when she heard the situation, "are you eating? Sleeping?" "Yes to both, honestly. Diane force-fed me a full dinner last night." "Are you experiencing any symptoms I should know about? Swelling? Contractions? Spotting?" "Nothing. Audrey is moving normally. I'm okay physically. I want you in front of a doctor in Woodstock within 48 hours. I'll send your records to Dr. Helen Carver at the Woodstock Medical Associates. She's excellent. She's expecting your call." "Thank you." "Clear." Pause. You did the right thing. Taking care of yourself is taking care of her. Sakura pressed the phone against her chest after she hung up and breathed for a moment. Then she picked up her laptop and opened the file she'd been working on before everything fell apart. A new documentary, early stages, about women who had rebuilt their lives after catastrophic loss. She looked at the working title she'd written on a planning document 6 months ago. After. She stared at it for a long time. Then she started typing. By Friday, 4 days after Sakura left, Sebastian Harlow had not slept more than 3 hours across the entire week, Patrick Drummond had confirmed through Glenn Tasker that Sakura was in Vermont, that she was staying with Diane Mercer, that she was safe and physically well, and had seen a local physician. This information had reduced Sebastian's acute terror without touching the thing underneath it, which was something raw and more permanent. He went to the office every day because not going was unthinkable. 20 years of discipline had made the motion automatic. He sat in meetings, he answered emails. Patrick covered for him with the kind of practiced discretion that made him invaluable. Nobody at Harlow Capital knew what was happening at home. Or almost nobody. His assistant, a young woman named Rosa Chen, who had worked for him for 3 years, and was perceptive enough to notice that he had not made a personal phone call from the office all week, and had declined lunch with anyone, and looked, under the composed surface, like someone walking through a burning building and pretending the smoke was just fog. On Friday evening, after the office cleared out, Sebastian sat alone at the long conference table on the 42nd floor and looked out at the city lights and thought about the note. "If you love Audrey at all, you will let me go quietly." He had read it dozens of times now. He had it memorized. And the thing that kept breaking him open, the line he couldn't get past, was not the accusation or the terms or even the finality of it. It was the conditional. If you love Audrey at all. As though she had calculated that her love for their unborn daughter was the only card she could trust to play. As though she had stopped believing in the version of him that loved her. He thought about when he had first seen Sakura through her camera lens at that Met Gala. This fierce, quiet woman who looked at everything with such clear attention, and how he had spent the whole evening working to be someone worth her attention. And he thought about how, at some point in the years between that evening and now, he had stopped working at it. He had let himself drift toward something easier and more immediate and less complicated. He had made the oldest, most unforgivable mistake available to a person. He had confused comfort for love and novelty for vitality, and he had done it while the woman who had made him want to be better was growing their daughter. He was still sitting at the conference table at 9 o'clock when his mother called. Margaret Harlow was 71 years old and had raised Sebastian alone after his father left when Sebastian was 8. She was a woman who did not deal in euphemism or gentle cushioning. She called Patrick, feeling the situation had escalated past professional management, had quietly made one call. "Sebastian Richard Harlow," his mother said. He closed his eyes. "Mum, Patrick called me. Tell me what happened." He told her. All of it. He did not edit for his own benefit or soften the narrative or present himself as anything other than what he was. His mother listened in complete silence, the specific silence of a woman who had not been surprised by human failure, but was entitled to her feelings about it anyway. When he finished, she said, "Are you going to fix this?" "I don't know if it can be fixed. That's not what I asked." "Mum, I asked if you were going to try." A long silence. "She told me not to contact her," he said. "She told you not to have people look for her and not to drag her back. She didn't say you could never speak again. She said to speak through attorneys." "Fine, do that. But beyond the legal machinery, Sebastian, are you going to be the man she married or the man she left?" He didn't answer. "I'm coming to New York on Sunday," Margaret said, "and I expect you to be home when I arrive. Not at the office. Home." A pause. "And Sebastian, that girl from the other situation, end it. Tonight. Whatever it costs you professionally with the Meridian deal. End it." He called Natalie Voss at 9:45 that evening. Natalie had been expecting the call. She had been expecting it in the way you expected, a reckoning that you've known was coming. with a kind of resigned dread that sits in the stomach like cold water. She answered on the second ring. Sebastian's voice was different than she'd ever heard it. The careful control was gone. He sounded like someone who had been awake for 4 days, which he had, and underneath the exhaustion there was something else, something broken. "Natalie," he said, "I need to end this. I need to tell you the truth about some things first, before I say anything else." "Okay," she said. "I told you Sakura and I had grown apart, that the pregnancy was from before things went wrong, that we were more like co-parents than—" He stopped. None of that was true, or it was true enough in the specific moments I said it to make it feel true. But it was a story I was telling to make myself feel less like someone doing something wrong. And you deserved to know you were trusting a story and not the truth. The silence that followed was the longest Natalie had experienced in a phone conversation. She sat with it. Then she said, "How long have you known she knew?" "She left 4 days ago. But when I found out she'd been to Glen Tasker, to a PI, it had been weeks. She knew for weeks." Natalie thought about the dinner at the West Village restaurant, the Friday where he had been distracted and checked his phone and left early. "She already knew that night," Natalie said quietly. Not a question. "Yes." "And you still came?" "Yes." Another silence, long and full. "I'm not going to pretend I wasn't aware of the situation," Natalie said finally. "I knew you were married. I made choices too. But I want you to know something. I looked her up after the Post item. I watched an interview she gave, and I spent about 3 days feeling like the most spectacular fool who ever graduated from Harvard." Sebastian didn't say anything. "End it," Natalie said, "and then do whatever you have to do to be the father she needs you to be. Even if she never takes you back, be the father. That much you owe her." She hung up. She sat for a long time in her dark living room. Then she called her sister Brooke. "It's over," she said. "Are you okay?" "No," Natalie said, "but I think I will be. I think I made this too easy on myself for too long." Brooke was quiet. Then she said, "Come to Philadelphia this weekend." "Yeah," Natalie said. "Okay." She booked a train ticket that night. Margaret Harlow arrived at the Upper West Side penthouse at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. She walked through the apartment with the systematic attention of a woman who is assessing damage and estimating what can be salvaged, which is more or less exactly what she was doing. She noticed the nursery last. She stood in the doorway a long time, looking at the pale yellow walls and the sleeping fox and the crib full of carefully folded blankets that nobody had touched in a week. Sebastian was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 5 days. Margaret sat across from him and poured herself coffee and looked at her son for a long time. "Your father did this to me," she said. Sebastian looked up. Not the same woman twice, but the same category of betrayal, the same assumption that what you had at home would wait patiently while you went and looked for something easier, somewhere else. She held her coffee cup in both hands. "I left him because he didn't think I was serious. He thought I was posturing. He thought I'd come home eventually because the alternative was too hard." She looked at Sebastian continuously. "I didn't come home." "I know," Sebastian said. "Sakura is more serious than you have been taking her. I saw that about her from the first year of your marriage. She has her own gravity. She is not the kind of woman who makes threats she doesn't intend to follow through on. I know that too." "Then what are you going to do?" "Her attorney, Diane Mercer, sent a letter yesterday, through my attorneys, setting out initial separation terms, access to accounts, the apartment, health insurance through delivery. She wants to handle everything formally. She's not coming back to negotiate in person. Margaret nodded slowly. And what are your attorneys saying? That I have strong grounds to contest certain... He stopped when he saw his mother's face. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to fight her on the terms. Whatever she's asking for is less than she's owed. Good. Margaret sets down her coffee. And the other thing? The practical thing, the one that doesn't have anything to do with attorneys. Sebastian shook his head, not understanding. She is 34 weeks pregnant, Sebastian. She is alone in a cabin in Vermont. I assume Diane is there, but Diane has a practice in Boston. She can't leave indefinitely. Sakura is going to need to see a doctor regularly. She is going to need someone in that delivery room who loves her. She is going to need, eventually, to come back to New York or go somewhere permanent because she cannot have that baby in a borrowed cabin. Margaret fixed him with the look she had been deploying to devastating effect since he was 8 years old. She doesn't want you there. I understand that. But she might accept me. Sebastian looked at his mother for a long time. You'd go to Vermont, he said. I'd go to Vermont, Margaret said. She called Sakura that afternoon. She did not call to negotiate or to represent Sebastian or to soften anything. She called because she was a woman who had once been in a remarkably similar position, albeit without a Peabody nomination and the resources to survive independently. And she thought that mattered. Sakura answered on the fourth ring. Margaret, she said. Her voice was cautious but not unkind. I'm not calling for him, Margaret said immediately. I want to be clear about that. I'm calling for you, and for Audrey. And because I have some experience with this particular kind of hurt, and I know what it is to be very pregnant and very alone and very angry, and to need someone who is not asking anything of you in return. A long pause. He told you everything, Sakura said. He told me. Yes. Another pause. How is he? Sakura asked. And then immediately, before Margaret could answer. Don't answer that. I don't want to know right now. All right, Margaret said. You could come to Vermont, Sakura said, finally, quietly, if you wanted to. Diane has to go back to Boston on Wednesday. I could. It would be good to have someone here who knows what they're doing, in case Audrey decides to come early. Margaret's voice, when she answered, was very carefully steady. I'll be there Thursday morning. Okay, Sakura said. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, sweetheart. 3 weeks after Sakura disappeared, a piece ran in a finance-adjacent newsletter called The Meridian Brief, well-sourced, meticulously reported, that detailed the fact that Natalie Voss had quietly resigned from Keller Bright Advisory and recused herself from the Harlow Capital restructuring project. The newsletter didn't speculate about why. It didn't need to. The circles that read the Meridian Brief were small and well-informed enough to connect the available dots. The larger financial press picked it up within 48 hours. By then, the broad outline of the story was moving through the city's social and professional layers with the specific velocity of a story that is simultaneously salacious and sad. Natalie had left Keller Bright, not because she was forced out, but because she chose to. She walked into her managing director's office, a man named Gordon Clark, who had hired her 4 years ago and had, in his own estimation, good reason to be proud of her, and told him the situation, told him cleanly, without excessive detail, what had happened and what the potential exposure was for the firm. Gordon Clark sat back in his chair and looked at her for a long time. He was 57 and had seen most categories of professional crisis over his career. He said, "Natalie, you're one of the best people in this building. I know, she said, but I'm also someone who made a significant error in judgment, and I'm not going to sit across from clients for the next 6 months pretending I didn't. That's not fair to anyone. We could move you off the Harlow account. I'd rather take some time, she said. I've been thinking about it. There's a fellowship at the Columbia Business School. Applied Ethics in Finance. The application period is open. Gordon looked at her for another moment. You're serious? I've been thinking about what I want to be, she said, not what I want to have. The two aren't the same. She submitted the Columbia application the following week. She didn't tell anyone except Brooke. Audrey Rose Harlow came into the world at 4:22 in the morning on December 14th in a hospital in White River Junction, Vermont, which had not been anyone's plan, but turned out to be exactly where it happened. Sakura had woken at midnight with contractions that she had initially dismissed as Braxton Hicks. By 1 o'clock she was less dismissive. By 1:30, Margaret, who had been sleeping in the cabin's second bedroom and had raised one child and been present for the birth of 4 grandchildren, belonging to various nieces and nephews, had made a decision and was in the car with Sakura before either of them had finished waking up entirely. They made it. Barely, but they made it. Dr. Helen Carver, the physician in Woodstock that Pamela Loft had recommended, who had become Sakura's doctor for the last month in Vermont, was on call and drove to White River Junction. Margaret stayed in the room. Sakura held her hand and did not ask for Sebastian and did not cry for him. But at some point in the hard middle hours of labor, she asked Margaret to tell her something good about him, not to convince her of anything. Just something good. Margaret told her about the time Sebastian was 12 years old and came home from school, having given his winter coat to a boy in his class whose family couldn't afford one. It had been February. He had walked home in a sweater in 20-degree weather and arrived home shaking, but with the absolute certainty that he'd done the right thing. He said to me, Margaret recalled, that the other boy had looked cold for weeks, and he'd looked warm for years, and the math seemed obvious. Sakura laughed, a proper laugh, real and unguarded, in the middle of everything. And then things accelerated, and there wasn't much more talking. Audrey Rose Harlow was 6 pounds, 9 ounces, and came out screaming with the offended energy of someone who had been interrupted. The first person Sakura called after she had held Audrey for 20 minutes and counted her fingers and her toes and pressed her lips to the top of her head and said her name quietly into the warm, small, perfect ear, was her sister Sophie. The second person she called was Patrick Drummond. "Patrick," she said. Her voice was different than it had been for months. Cleaner. "Tell Sebastian he has a daughter. 6 pounds, 9 ounces. Everyone is healthy." Patrick said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was uncharacteristically rough. "I will. Sakura, congratulations. She is very lucky to have you for her mother." "Thank you, Patrick." She handed the phone to Margaret, who took it into the hallway. Patrick called Sebastian at 5 in the morning. Sebastian was already awake. He had not slept in 48 hours, gripped by a premonition he couldn't name. He picked up immediately. Patrick said, "She's here, Audrey. 6 pounds, 9 ounces. Sakura is well. Both of them are perfectly well." Sebastian Harlow, the man who had sat in the Forbes cover meeting and answered every question without blinking, who had stood in boardrooms and closed deals worth more than most countries' annual budgets, without his voice shifting a single register, pressed the phone against his forehead and wept with a completeness that left him emptied out and new, the way some grievances do. He booked a flight to Vermont. Then he cancelled it because Sakura had not asked him to come. He sat with that for a long time. He called his attorney and told him to meet whatever terms Sakura's side put forward. No contest, no negotiations, whatever she needed. Then he put on a coat and walked out into the December city and walked for 2 hours in the cold dark and thought about a 12-year-old boy who had given his coat away in February because the math seemed obvious. By February, Sakura was back in New York. She had found an apartment on the Upper East Side, a proper one, 4 bedrooms, good light, a building with a doorman that she had chosen herself and signed the lease on with her own money, though Sebastian had also set up a support account that her attorneys had negotiated and that she had accepted for Audrey's benefit without ceremony. She and Sebastian had a meeting, the first time they had been in the same room since she'd driven away from the parking garage 3 months earlier. It was in Patrick's office, with attorneys on both sides, and it was formally and professionally structured. Sebastian looked at her across the conference table, and she looked back at him, and there was a reckoning in that exchange that didn't require words. He said, at the end of the meeting, when the attorneys were gathering their papers, "Can I see her?" Sakura looked at him for a moment. Audrey was in the car with Diane, who had come down from Boston for the occasion. Diane wasn't the kind of friend who missed important days. "Thursday," Sakura said. 2 in the afternoon. You can come to the apartment." He nodded. "Sebastian," she said. He looked up. "If you show up the way you showed up at the end of our marriage, inconsistent, distracted, telling yourself comfortable stories, I will protect her from that. I will do it without apology. Do you understand me?" "Yes," he said. "But if you show up the way you showed up at the beginning, the way you were when I thought I was going to spend my life with you." She paused. "Then we'll figure it out." She walked out of the office. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection in the brushed steel doors. She had Audrey on a sling against her chest. She had asked Diane to bring her in from the car after the meeting, before leaving. And Audrey was asleep with her face tilted sideways in that absolute, boneless way of very young babies. Sakura put her hand on the warm curve of Audrey's back. She felt the steady, miraculous rise and fall of her breathing. Outside, February in New York was cold and bright and relentless in the way New York always is, indifferent to individual stories, crowded with strangers living their own complicated lives. Sakura walked out into it with her daughter and her duffel bag, long since unpacked in a new apartment, and her documentary, After, now with 40 pages of development notes and a commission inquiry from a streaming platform she respected, and she walked into the cold air, and she did not look back at the building. Natalie Voss received the Columbia Fellowship. She started in the spring semester. She told her ethics professor on the first day, when asked what had motivated her application, that she had spent 4 months becoming someone she didn't recognize and needed to understand how that was possible, so it could never happen again. The professor wrote something in the margin of his notepad. He later told a colleague that she was going to be one of the most honest students he'd ever taught. Margaret Harlow drove from Vermont back to New York in January, and on the way, she stopped at a bookstore in Woodstock and bought Sakura a first edition of The Velveteen Rabbit. Different from the one already on the nursery shelf, older, cloth-bound, found in the rare books section in the back. She left it on the passenger seat of Sakura's car the next morning with a note that read, "For Audrey, from someone who knows that the best things are made real by being loved." Sebastian showed up on Thursday at 2 o'clock. He rang the buzzer. He waited. When the door opened and he walked in and saw Sakura standing in the hallway of her new apartment with Audrey in her arms, small and red-faced and deeply skeptical looking in the way of all newborns who have not yet decided what to make of the world. He stopped breathing for a moment. He had brought nothing. No flowers, no gifts, no carefully chosen objects. Patrick had asked him what he was bringing, and he'd said nothing, and Patrick had said good, and that had been the right answer. He crossed the hallway and Sakura held Audrey out, and he took his daughter for the first time. She weighed almost nothing. She smelled like something he had no words for. She looked at him, or in his general direction, with the vague, present attention of someone who is still deciding whether the outside world is worth the effort. And he held her with both hands, and felt the whole complicated weight of everything he'd done, and everything he still had a chance to be, in perfect, terrible suspension. Sakura watched him from across the hallway. She didn't soften. She didn't dare. She held the full, clear truth of the situation in both hands, the way she had always held difficult truths in her work, continuously, unflinchingly, with the willingness to let them be exactly what they were. There was no neat ending. There was no resolution that erased the harm. There was a woman who had packed a duffel bag and driven into the dark and come back with herself intact. There was a man standing in a hallway with his daughter, deciding, minute by minute, who to be. There was a baby who had done absolutely nothing wrong, sleeping in her father's arms with magnificent indifference to the wreckage she'd been born into. And there was, just barely, the possibility of something after. What you just heard is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about what happens when a woman trusts herself over comfort, over security, over everything she has built, and walks out anyway. Sakura Harlow didn't disappear because she was weak. She vanished because she was clear. And that clarity, in the middle of a pregnancy, in the middle of the life she had built, took more courage than most of us will ever be asked for. There are people watching this right now who are sitting with their own version of that manila envelope, their own 4-sentence note they haven't written yet, their own duffel bag they can't quite bring themselves to pack. This story is for them. If it moved you, if it stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, please like this video right now. It takes 2 seconds and it tells us to keep making content that matters. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because someone in your life does. And if you don't want to miss what we bring you next, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We tell real stories, complicated stories, true stories, about what it means to survive something and come out the other side, still knowing who you are. We'll see you in the next one.